Hello.
Hello.
I am having internet issues, which I had heard about. My brother said he was having issues. So I'm using my phone at the moment, which is fine. How are you?
I'm good.
Share the screen. I wanted to see where it's going. There we go. That's it. Got it. All right. So, what's new with you and Ron?
Well, I have an earache. Finally went to the doctor today. And I had to start taking a nasal spray.
Ooh.
Ron is fine. We're still getting along.
Good. Good.
I need to ask you a question. How do you feel about Hamsas?
Oh, they're fine. It's fine. No problem.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, no, they're interesting.
had a
We actually had a Hamsa in our foyer for many years. We just didn't put it up yet. Hamsas are fish symbols, or like a house blessing on like a plaque of some kind. Oh yeah, it's more of like a Mediterranean Jewish custom or Middle Eastern custom than like European custom.
Right.
But that's that's fine.
We have a fun Hamsa collection.
Nice.
Yeah, on our fireplace.
Yeah, they ward off.
You'll
the
see
evil
that
eye.
someday if this is ever over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They ward off the evil eye.
No. I'm just gonna take it tomorrow. Okay. I didn't make it over today. Cynthia has a migraine.
Oh yeah, Gertrude's under the weather. Migraines are just
they're
terrible.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Sukkot.
Yeah.
So it is certainly. Someone's here. Maybe Ellen joining us. Maybe just make sure we get everybody here. Make sure that Ellen's in the right link. 1 second. Oh, I see. That's so funny. She joined the wrong. Hang on a second. Let me just click to give her the correct link. Invite. Copy link. Okay. So Sukkot is perhaps, and it's kind of odd, it is the biggest festival in the entire Tanakh. It gets the most ink space. It gets the most ink space of any festival in the entire Hebrew Bible. Yom Kippur probably gets the second most ink space. Rosh Hashanah gets a couple lines. Rosh Hashanah is not a big deal in the Tanakh. Rosh Hashanah is a minor festival until the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And then Sukkot is very big there. And in Ezra and Nehemiah, they have Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, but they have no Yom Kippur. It's bizarre. It's very bizarre. So, but we're going to see looking at like the sources in the Tanakh, why Sukkot is such a major event every year, why it's such a big deal. I think I was interested in this question as a child, first realizing that there was something after Yom Kippur that I found very compelling. Something about like the sensuality of Sukkot, the multi-sensory nature of it, where it's about smell and touch and sound and being outdoors, just very compelling. And was surprised that it really wasn't more widely observed. It certainly has become much more widely observed in the past generation than it was in the entire, most of the 20th century. The companies that make Sukkot have increased. Their sales are annual, and it's a much bigger deal now. So I'm glad about that. So I'm going to look back at Sukkot over time. So it first gets mentioned in the book of Exodus. Exodus, every book of the Torah except for Genesis has a calendar, and in every calendar Sukkot appears. So it is called Chag HaKatzir. It is the festival of the cutting or the harvest. And that's sort of like one hint of why it's such a big deal. It is really the end of the entire harvest cycle, beginning with Pesach. Pesach is a harvest of the barley. Shavuot is a harvest of the wheat. And Sukkot is the end of the summer ripening and the fall harvest. So as far as like the festival cycle goes, it is the culmination of the three. So it is, before in the land of Israel, the cold, rainy season when basically everybody just goes home and prepares for spring again. So it is very much like the end of the year, which Hebrew is called Tikufat Hashanah. It's like the end of the season, and it is this end of the season. So in Leviticus, it has another name. So number one, so notice that like Sukkot here, not called Sukkot, it is just the festival of the harvest, and it's very agrarian. In Leviticus, a very theological book of the Torah. In fact, the priests, the authors of Leviticus were the first Jewish mystics. So they have a very different view of this. And here it is called Chag HaSukkot for the first time in the Torah. You might think it's a different thing, but it is actually, back to Chag HaKatzir, the harvest festival has no date. It's simply, I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm sorry. Chag HaKatzir is Shavuot. Chag HaAsif, that is Sukkot. Chag HaKatzir is Shavuot. But it's at the end of the year. But there's no date attached to it. It's simply whenever you finish the harvest, that's when you would do it. It's an old layer. In Leviticus, it requires a date. And that's when you know with Leviticus, because Leviticus, they like to know when things happen. Like, give me a month, give me a day. I want to know which lunar cycle this happens in. Precision is their thing, for sure. So it's on the 15th day of the 7th month. That's precise. That's called Chag HaSukkot. And it is like other festivals. It is a Mikra Kodesh. It is a holy convocation, which means that malacha is avoided, whatever malacha is. Let's call malacha creative activities, for the activities that modify creation. On day 1, but not day 7, because day 8 is both the end of Sukkot and a separate festival, so called Shmini Atzeret, separate thing. But here it is, 7 days long. Later in Leviticus, like moments later. So Sukkot appears in Leviticus first in this, just, give me the date, tell me the end date, fantastic. And then the festival calendar comes to an end. And then, it's like, wait, one more thing. And then it adds this other layer of Sukkot to it that is really where our Sukkot comes from. So it is here, it has another name here. So same day, same month. Here it's called Chag Ladonai. So here is the first intimation that this is really like the major festival. It is simply called Chag Ladonai, not called Chag HaSukkot, but simply God's festival. And it has this: take the hadar trees, branches of palm, boughs of leafy trees, willows of the brook, and rejoice before God for 7 days. So that becomes the lulav and the etrog, but that's not the only way that could have been read. So it's unclear what you do. with the four species in this paragraph, but they're basically people are gathering. It looks like some kind of fruit from a hadar tree, and then other branches, and they're doing some kind of simcha, rejoicing for all 7 days. And then it says, "You shall live in huts, basukot." Who lives in Sukkot? No, what do you do in Sukkot? You live in them. Who's doing it? Everybody. And then why? To remember that we used to live in Sukkot. That's different. Whatever that means, that's fine. But basically, it is everybody for the entire week is living outside of their houses in Sukkot temporary structures after the harvest, which is weird because during the harvest is when you would build a small hut out in the field. You'd go out and camp out in the harvest time to watch your fields, keep away the animals, thieves, whatever. When the harvest is done, you come back home. Oh, no, no, no. We stay out in a hut near our home for 7 more days when we're all done. Very strange behavior. Sforno, Italian 16th century commentator on this extra passage of Sukkot, he's like, we've talked about the festivals, and they're all called Mikra Kodesh, but Sukkot is the only one that has this extra level of observance. And that is this, it is about these four species living in the hut. That is a very unusual thing, and it makes it unlike any other festival. It's a Mikra Kodesh plus this other layer of joy in the outdoors. It's the only festival that says leave your home behind for 1 week. The only one that requires 4 species. Very strange. Chizkuni, another commentator, he's picking up on the phrase, oh, you rejoice for 7 days, for 7 consecutive days. He's like, whoa, that's major. He's like, the reason is because each day of Sukkot is like a separate festival. Every day has its own unique features, its own unique offerings, sacrifices. And his proof for that is that, and we'll see in numbers, every single day of Sukkot, the number of animals offered as sacrifices changes. Therefore, every day is really a self-contained Chag. So it's really a week of festival versus like 1 day, middle days, and an end day like for Passover. Sukkot is just 7 days nonstop. Every day is its own mini festival. Chizkuni also notes that this is also a very strange shelter in place, if you will, moment. He says it sounds like when Aaron was in the Mishkan with his sons and 2 of his sons died, they had to stay there. They couldn't leave home. On Shabbat, people generally stay at home. But here on Sukkot, it's like stay in this temporary hut for the entire festival. So there's something about that. It is this remarkable series of mini festivals. It is this outdoors, out of the house thing. It's peculiar that it's post-harvest outdoors in a hut, and it's a shelter in place. Like be in this shelter and basically only leave when you have to. Like live in this odd thing for all 7 days. And it's interesting that he brings in Aaron as the high priest in the Mishkan, comparing us in the Sukkot. There's a lot of Mishkan and temple and Sukkot analogies that come up later as well. So it's not surprising that just as for whatever reason you would not leave the Mishkan's courtyard, so too we also try to stay inside the Sukkah during Sukkot. So very interesting. And the Haftarah for day 2 of Sukkot makes that even clearer, that analogy. Okay, so Deuteronomy also has Sukkot in its calendar. It is called the Feast of Booths. It's got 7 days. It is radically inclusive. It is everybody. But here it's also called Chag Ladonai. So it also has another name, just God's festival here as well, actually combining 2 of the earlier texts and putting both names here. Perhaps creating a clarity that, lest you think that these were two separate festivals, these are actually one and the same. It has the Levitical time and it has the other names in it. So it's really just everything's happening here. And it's also very clear here that it is a post-harvest festival. It's really not about remembering the past, it's really celebrating the agricultural joy of the present. And it's part of this 3 pilgrimage festival cycle, you know, unleavened bread, weeks, and booths, and everybody appears. So here it's really set in this as the it's as the culmination of the whole cycle.
What is
Thoughts,
the week?
comments, questions at the moment?
What is the weeks? Festival of the Weeks?
That's Shavuot. Shavuot literally means weeks because it's 7 weeks after the first day of Pesach. Yes,
There's
Kelly.
something in the back of my mind that I thought I heard once, that Hanukkah was really to celebrate Sukkot.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes. In the book of
Okay.
Maccabees, in Second Maccabees, Second Maccabees is a letter to Jews in the diaspora, letting everybody know about the events of the Maccabee War and why they should celebrate Hanukkah. One of the reasons they give is, in that year after we took back the temple, we didn't have time to do, we couldn't do Sukkot that year or for a couple years because the temple was a Greek temple and was inappropriate to use. And so we did a makeup for Sukkot that year, which is why Hanukkah is 8 days long.
Okay. So that makes it.
Now, that is an older reason than the oil burning for 8 days. That reason, that letter of Maccabees 2 was written like in the last third of the 2nd century BCE. The oil reason comes 500 years later, if you can kind of fathom this kind of like time frame. So that is one of the oldest reasons why Hanukkah is 8 days long, because it was a Sukkot makeup week.
Okay.
So, yeah, and Sukkot's that important. Like,
yeah, that's
they didn't do Shavuot either, but the one that they missed, that they made up, was Sukkot.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't make up Pesach
that kind of
year.
gives it an extra.
Yeah, I mean, they missed them all, but that's the one they wanted to read. It's also the most recent. Funny is right after the passage in Leviticus. So let me go back for a second. After the passage in Leviticus that mentions Sukkot, the very next passage is the making of the olive oil for the menorah. Now, I'm not saying that that's an allusion to Hanukkah in the Torah, but that is clearly an interesting coincidental allusion to Hanukkah in the Torah, is where after Sukkot comes the menorah and the olive oil. I think that's fascinating. I've never seen a rabbinic source that says, here's a hint of Hanukkah in the Torah, but it's kind of obvious. So I don't know. There it is. All right, so Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy often brings together different traditions from Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and creates a harmony or an amalgam. I think this is no different. Feast of Booths, Chag Ladonai. We saw Feast of Booths. Where did we see that? We saw that one. Feast of Booths was, Leviticus, Festival of the Lord. We saw that. And called Sukkot in the second passage of Leviticus. It was called Chag Sukkot and Festival of the Lord, and we saw Feast of Booths in Leviticus and Vayikra. Right, so Deuteronomy brings in the Levitical dual name, but Chag HaAsif, the ingathering, that's only in Exodus. That's an earlier layer that doesn't really get brought forward very much. No, Bamidbar, Numbers, here's where you kind of see, like, okay, Sukkot is insane if you're looking at just like the pure number of offerings. Here it's called Chag Ladonai in Numbers. It is not called Sukkot at all. It's just Chag Ladonai. It's a 7-day thing. And on every single day of it, there are a number of bulls offered. Every day, beginning with 13, 12, it descends, 11, 10, and down to 7 on the 7th day, adding up to 70 bulls total. So 70 is, for the rabbis, that is the magic number that indicates the number of nations of the world. That's what 70 means for the rabbis. 70 is the planet has shown up. So this is the origin. Number one, this is the origin of why for Hanukkah, Beit Shammai says you actually begin with 8 candles and work your way down. It parallels the offerings of bulls, not only remembering the miracle of the oil and the Maccabees, but also remembering that this was a Sukkot makeup day, week rather. That doesn't get accepted as Jewish practice, but that's what Beit Shammai was basing it on. It remembered that it was a Sukkot makeup. But for the rabbis, this 70 bulls symbolizes the nations of the world who they imagine coming to Jerusalem on Sukkot. And now that's not just rabbinic, that's also prophetic, because the Zechariah, day 1, Haftarah for Sukkot, that's exactly what Zechariah is envisioning in the future. So we're going to hang on to that. But this menu is profoundly large. Every day is different. For Pesach, the first day is special, the last day is, the middle days, it's basically it's a different menu. So not every day of Pesach is as special as the first and the last day, but every day of Sukkot has a festival menu, as it were. So this is the reason why every single day is like a festival, which really is pretty on a high level. That's really intense. The 8th day, which does not get mentioned in every calendar, only 1 bull gets offered. And that is why the rabbis imagine that at Shmini Atzeret, it's like we had guests all week, and now it's just you and me. It's like this intimate last day after Sukkot. The guests are all gone. Just one day to hang out before everyone goes home for winter. But there's another thing that happens on Sukkot, but not every year, which is called Hakel. Hakel, which is the second to last mitzvah in the Torah. The last one is write your own Torah scroll. Hakel comes during Sukkot once every 7 years. And Hakel, Moses says, everyone comes to Jerusalem for Sukkot, especially when it is a sabbatical year that has just begun, when debts are remitted. For Deuteronomy, sabbatical years are primarily an economic safety net. And so everyone's been released from their debts. So everyone gathers in Jerusalem for Sukkot, and they read the entire Torah, the whole thing, which would take the better part of an entire day. It's doable. And everybody listens to the entire Torah, and then they all, as a huge educational experience, as it says here, to learn to be in awe of God. So, here, having experienced Sukkot, having experienced the remote debts, having then experienced, hearing the entire Torah, people will then go home that cold, long, wet winter with a renewed sense of awe in the presence of God. And that was an every 7-year bonus event happened at the end of Sukkot. Nowadays, they actually do Hakel. They do this actually today at the Kotel. The president actually reads just the actual passage about Hakel to kind of like keep it alive in the people's memory. They don't do the entire Torah, but they kind of do it on sabbatical years, which is coming up in 2 years, I think. So then you come to the book of Kings, and when Solomon's temple is finished being built, it is the concluding celebration is during Sukkot. So here we've got then a very clear juxtaposition of, the completion of one of the most massive construction projects in Jewish history, the Temple of Solomon, and it contrasted with the festival of Sukkot. They call it Sukkot here? See, they don't call it Sukkot. Here it's just called Hechag, the festival. So already it has become just the festival, not of Sukkot, but it's just already its own thing. But that's when they do the dedication of the temple. So Solomon brings in the ark. There's a massive procession, and it is a You thought that numbers had a ridiculous quantity of bulls killed?
Oh no.
22,000 oxen,
Oh.
120,000. I mean, it was like the entire nation came for a massive barbecue. I mean, this really makes, I mean, this was already, Sukkot already existed. This was probably like the craziest Sukkot of all time.
When was this?
What?
When was that?
David was a little over 3,000 years ago. So this is like a little under 3,000 years ago.
And they only did that once, or they did it
Only built the first temple once.
Oh, okay.
Right. I mean, it was that's when the first temple was completed. They did this amazing, huge national barbecue party. I mean, they sanctify the structures. They bring the ark in, which contains a bit of Mount Sinai. They put that then on Mount Zion, and it becomes, the Temple Mount for the first time, and everything is just in place. It's sort of like it's like the last step of leaving Mount Sinai, coming to rest on that mountain. And Sukkot becomes like the festival. They actually do 14 days. They do a double Sukkot, ending with like an 8th extra day at the end. And it raises a question. Well, if they're doing it Sukkot, did these extra 7 days come before or after Sukkot? And the rabbis assume, well, since they're doing Sukkot on Sukkot and they're ending with the 8th day, then the other 7 days must have come before Sukkot, which means they didn't do Yom Kippur. And that's a problem. They go, what they do? So there's a funny little passage in Moed Katan, the volume of the Talmud that deals mostly with the laws of mourning. And they're talking about Solomon's temple dedication. Rabbi Parnach said that Rabbi Yochanan said that year, the year of the dedication, the people did not observe Yom Kippur because the 7-day celebration of the temple's dedication blocked it. They were feasting the whole week. The people were worried afterwards, because they realized, oh my gosh, afterwards they kind of got caught in the revelry. What do we do? And then they go, perhaps the enemies of the Jewish people. Now, funny phrase. When they say Sonei Yisrael, the Jewish people's enemies, what they mean is the Jewish people themselves. It's a euphemism for being your own worst enemy. Maybe our enemies will be liable for destruction because we transgressed Yom Kippur. We ate the whole day. And then a bat kol comes out, like a divine voice that says, you all get a place in the world to come. Like, it's okay. Like the rejoicing was so profound in that year that Yom Kippur, it's all right. He did an even more important thing with his dedication than Yom Kippur that one year. That's a pretty amazing story, that Yom Kippur, which if you violate, you're cut off from the people. Here you get exactly the opposite. You are assured a place in the afterlife, basically, because you were part of this remarkable celebration of this double Sukkot at the King Solomon's dedication. That's a very positive view of temple as well. The rabbis are ambivalent about temple and about the priest in many, many ways. Here's a resounding, divine affirmation of the importance of the Beit Mikdash in Jerusalem. Like Yom Kippur that year, it's all right. Don't worry about it. And then Zechariah kind of began to shape it as a day way in the distant future. Remember, Zechariah is post-exile, so Jews are living mostly in Babylon. A few have come back to be in Judea. There's a building project to create a second temple. It's very unimpressive. When they lay down the foundation, the oldest people who remember the first temple are in tears because here's a second temple, but it's really pathetic. Like they go, nothing like the first one. So there's a lot of ambivalence about second temple loss and renewal. So Zechariah, in this setting, he's the last of the prophets, kind of looks to in that day. So he's like, Bayom Hahu, one day in the future. And he envisions a time when there's this huge battle, plague and war, and everyone who survives, everyone comes to Jerusalem that year, and they basically bow low to God on Sukkot. And if you don't come, you get no rain. So here's also one of the, I mean, it's very clear. I mean, this is the beginning of Israel's rainy season. It's very clear that Sukkot is a lot about rain. And the harvest being done, we hope we have enough rain for next year or we're all going to die. So that also makes Sukkot a major festival because without water, we're dead. So a lot of the liturgy that's emerged around Sukkot has to do with water, ecosystems, cattle disease, crop disease. It's really focused on the overall health of the planet. That is Sukkot's original source of anxiety. All of the liturgy is hoping for a good agrarian year. I mean, so much of it is agrarian. And then, praying for rain on Shmini Atzeret, when, Sukkot's done, we're back inside, is clearly then timely because Israel's rainy season begins. And according to the rabbis, the world is judged for its rain on Sukkot. And Zechariah is part of the source of this idea where Sukkot's when the quantity of rain gets judged for the year. And the nations get their allocation if in Zechariah's vision, if they came on Sukkot to Jerusalem to pay homage to, the real God and not their, imitation gods. So here it becomes, and this sort of like is what gives rise to, the 70 nations all coming. I don't know if Zechariah had that in mind, but the rabbis put together 70 bulls, Zechariah's all nations come, therefore it's Sukkot is when everyone comes, everyone offers their own bull, or the bulls that we offer, it's one per nation who should be there. And if they're not, woe unto them to come and do Sukkot. So it becomes this radically inclusive that all of Israel does Sukkot. Now it's the entire planet does Sukkot. And it becomes an ecological concern for everyone. I mean, rain as like the epitome of agrarian health for the year, it's like we're praying now for the planet's good weather for the coming year. And that becomes Sukkot's global focus here with Zechariah, is that everyone needs the right amount of rain at the right season. Well, come and pray for rain together. Every habitat gets what they need. So that is a significant magnification of Sukkot, just from Israel's concerns now to actually global rain concerns.
So if it rains on the first day of Sukkot, that's a good sign?
Actually, no, it's actually a terrible sign. The analogy the rabbis make to that, it's as if you are serving your master in the dining room and they pour the wine on your head. So rain on Sukkot feels like a slap in the face. I think that just speaks to how much they long to be in the Sukkah, and to not be in the Sukkah, they just feel very, very disappointed and like, what do we do to deserve this? So this year has been an amazing Sukkot. I mean, like, my gosh, has the weather been this good ever for Sukkot? Not in the past 30 years for me. Maybe in Israel, but that's about it.
Not for Wichita, Kansas.
I'll take it. So the next big Sukkot, so Zechariah's time period, post-exile, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, very important books to understand the end of sacrificial-based Judaism, or like the beginning of the end. Like, the Second Temple was a phasing out of sacrifices, but what gets phased in Ezra and Nehemiah is Torah. The 5 books of Moses makes its first public appearance in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and everyone's come back. There's this big reaffirmation, this big national renewal of the covenant. They read the entire Torah on Rosh Hashanah, on Tishrei the 1st. So here's the first idea of Tishrei the 1st becoming an important festival. Perhaps because in Babylon, that was when you would crown the king. And so Tishrei the 1st becoming like an annual coronation of God might have begun after the exile in Babylon. So they read the entire Torah. The people kind of melt down, realizing how far they've fallen from the Torah's ideal. And then after they read that part, they tell the people, go home, eat, drink, be merry, come back tomorrow. Like just go home, celebrate the festival right now, come back tomorrow. So on the second day, it was not Rosh Hashanah. So the day after Rosh Hashanah, they all come back and they read more and they realize, oh my gosh, we have another festival coming up. And they call it the Festival of the Seventh Month, B'Chag B'Chodesh Hashvi'i. So it doesn't have a name other than Chag, festival again. Now, here's what's weird about it. It's very strange. So, and this is one of the oddest texts. So they read about dwelling in booths during the festival. They don't call it Chag Sukkot, but they say dwell in Sukkot during the festival. They go to the mountains and they bring leafy branches of olive trees, pine trees, myrtles, palms, other leafy trees to make booths. So they go and gather out, yes, myrtle, one of the 4 species. Yes, palm, one of the 4 species. Leafy trees could be like the other brand, but there's no etrog mentioned, but they have olive and pine, and they use those branches not to make a lulav, but to basically make their schach on their huts. So basically, they go out, gather branches, they come home, they go on top of their houses. This is important. Most people built their sukkah on the roof. You had a ladder on your second floor of your house, you would build a sukkah. And you would then, put up the structure, put up the branches on top, and you would basically eat on the roof in your little sukkah during Sukkot. That's what, or in their courtyards, wherever. They built these things everywhere. The whole area of Jerusalem was filled with booths everywhere, and they did that. And basically, it's interesting. Here, they remember not leaving Egypt. Here, they remember leaving Babylon. They left the captivity of Babylon, and in the Sukkot they remember that, which is interesting. The Jewish calendar, so the numbers of the months remind you of the captivity in Egypt. The Babylonian names of the months, which are the Jewish calendar's months, they remind you of the captivity in Babylon. But here they have the old names, but they have the memory of the recent captivity. So Sukkot, which was to remember the Exodus, here remembers the return from exile in Babylon. So there's memory here too, but a different layer of memory. And they hadn't done this in 500 years. Like this, Sukkot had languished. Now what's weird is that they had done Sukkot when they built the first temple, but there's no memory of that here. Now, I don't know what that's about. And they rejoice. And they read Torah every day, and it's 7 days, and then with the 8th day at the end. So it's Sukkot, but there's no 4 species, there's no lulav and etrog, but there's booths, living outdoors, and just rejoicing. This is like the beginning of the Second Temple period. What emerges from this is something crazy. It is called the Chalil. This becomes, in the Second Temple period, a raging party every night of Sukkot called the Chalil, the flute. Let me get past the English to get to English. So they did the Chalil for 5 or 6 days based on when Shabbat fell during Sukkot. If Sukkot was on Shabbat, it was a 6-day party. If Shabbat's in the middle, they would have, Sukkot, the non-Shabbat days, Shabbat, and then the rest for 5 days. So whatever it was. So it's called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the water drawing festival. And this is the thing. If you've never seen Simchat Beit HaShoeva, you've never seen joy in your life. It was the ultimate in joy. And here's sort of how they describe it. So after Sukkot's over, it was just 1 day back then, they would basically light up golden lamps with golden bowls on top, with ladders, with young priests like swinging around, jars of oil with like tons of oil. They lit up the place like a torch. Old priestly garments were used for the wicks, and they lit up the entire city. And then basically the rabbis juggled lit torches, And they sing and they dance and they have this. The Levites are playing, like the Levite band is playing, everyone's singing, and it's basically it's like a raging dance party in Jerusalem for every night of Sukkot except for Shabbat. They would blow the trumpets. It was just like crazy. And then, of course, they have the daily offerings every day, which basically ends up being a huge barbecue. So basically, barbecue by day, rave by night. That was the entire city of Jerusalem for most of the Second Temple period. But it began with Ezra and Nehemiah making Sukkot this huge festival day, bringing back the festival. And it's just, it's a huge week-long barbecue / rave. Yeah. And that sort of like is sort of, and that's like the rabbinic memory of Sukkot. When the first temple was destroyed, that was sort of like how things ended up. So it goes from an agricultural harvest festival to a national barbecue and rave along the way, with all these other intermediary steps happening.
Is that when the maidens came out to find their?
That's actually Yom Kippur.
Oh,
On Yom Kippur, at the latter half of the day, women would go out and proposals would be made. White dresses were borrowed and loaned to friends, and courtship happened in the orchards after noon of Yom Kippur. I mean, they were hungry, but I guess they were, hungry, I guess. I don't know. That, and on Tu B'Av, which is the post Tisha B'Av, like the Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day. You guys know what Sadie Hawkins Day is?
I do.
Yeah, Ellen, you know what that is? Yeah, so that was like, women would basically court men on Tu B'Av.
Right.
I'm not sure Yom Kippur, but it was like the other day when a lot of things were arranged. Yeah.
Is that a Jewish tradition? No.
I've read sources on Tu B'Av that women would basically not court men on those days. Yeah. And that actually has an old tradition too. Women courting men. When Pharaoh decrees that all baby boys should be killed, the rabbis imagine that the husbands and wives immediately separate. The men move out, they move into the orchard, and they live apart and essentially divorce their wives. Miriam, in the rabbinic mind, goes to her father and says, "You're worse than Pharaoh because you're functionally killing off baby girls as well, because you won't even give them a chance." And so the women, but the men don't want to listen to her. And so she goes to her mother, and the women go down to the orchards and they re-seduce their husbands.
Oh.
You may have ever wondered if Moses is, in the story of Moses' birth, it says, there's a Levite and a Levite woman and man who marry and have a child, and that's Pharaoh's decree. And then all of a sudden there's an older sibling. Well, how could you be married, have a child, and then magically have an older sister? So they imagine that actually what they're describing is the reunion of the two people after the divorce because of Pharaoh's decree. And they had the other two siblings in their prior marriage. So it is a strange part of the story where the firstborn child has an older sibling. Like, what's going on with that? So that's
the question.
So that gives rise to the story of the men and women separating, and the women re-seducing their husbands to bring them back, and that leads to Moses being born. So there is a tradition of women courting men that definitely appears in that narrative thread as well.
Rabbi, so
yes, Adam.
The Sukkot festival, the first temple period, was a harvest festival.
Yes.
For 7 days. People were in Jerusalem for 7 days.
They're supposed to be, yep.
Not partying, but not partying as much, maybe. Then,
well, I mean, it was probably not like what they had with this Khalil in the Second Temple.
Okay, so then 500 years later, there's the party atmosphere
Uh-huh.
around around Sukkot. The second temple, and there's a little bit of difference that maybe we're remembering the Exodus from Babylonia maybe more than the Exodus from Egypt.
Mm. Or well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know in the later second temple period, but in Ezra and Nehemiah, when they're doing Sukkot, they're celebrating their own captivity. I noticed that for the first time preparing for this. So I'm curious about that, like that, where in the Exodus memory come from, how that plays in with the memory of the recent memory of being back from Babylon.
So my question um, is this difference in emphasis? You know, what's the significance? Is there any significance to that other than just sort of like a history lesson, or is there some sort of significance to that? And then, do we? I guess what do we take from that?
What I get from that is that the rituals that we have all have layers and layers and layers. And they acquire layer, and they're constantly being reinterpreted through the lens of people's experience in that time period. So I think, like, I think that, if it began as a purely agrarian thing where people just simply, came to Jerusalem to express gratitude for, the good harvest, and then at some point you kind of also add on that layer of, while we also want to remember, that time of fragility living in the wilderness, like that layer gets added on. I'm curious about like how that happens, or it's if the memory layer was first and then it became agrarian later. I'm not quite sure, but I think over time, just doing rituals year over year, the experiences that we have, we kind of like the rituals acquire layers of meaning based on current experience.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had the memory of the Exodus in Sukkot, then people's more contemporary memory in that time period of the Exodus from Babylon, that kind of like, it felt relevant. Like, wow, this is happening yet again. This is another example of the Exodus being like a template for future events of redemption, and we just experienced one. Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of like adds another layer onto it.
So the party atmosphere, does that even take away the whole memory part of the holiday?
It's a good question. It's certainly, this description is really quite I don't see any memory. It's surrounding, the water drawing itself, which is the uniquely Sukkot thing, where in the oral Torah, there's this, they would pour water from the Siloam pools on a certain part of the altar as an expression of gratitude for the rain that came the past year and a hope for the good rainfall in the coming year. And certainly it does feel like it's also, everyone's basically going home after this party. Like they're going to go back home, and they're going to be home for winter, and they won't see each other again for 6 months until Pesach for the most part. So it is sort of like an end of the year, everything is done. We can do no more. So they have this raging party. But yeah, I don't feel a lot of memory of Exodus. It does not feel a different kind of piety, perhaps. A different kind of piety. Yeah, I don't feel this is not quite a somber day. Shmini Atzeret was somber. That's kind of like the hangover day, perhaps.
So next year we can celebrate the end of COVID, maybe.
There you go. Yes. Yeah, people have already been thinking about like Jewishly to what rituals are we gonna either reinterpret or create to celebrate this coming back in, and this certainly,
Oh yeah.
People are already thinking about
Zoom party,
reopening rituals of various kinds based on various considerations.
Well, a Zoom party once a year.
Interesting. Zecher LaCovid,
all the time of the
Why do
COVID.
we Zoom tonight? We Zoom to remember the year in which we Zoomed. To put a mezumza on your door. That's a Jamie Smart joke. That's not me. That's hers. I think she's having the kids make a mezumza for their computers to mark them as like, this is special Jewish time on my computer now. It's very nice.
Mhm.
Okay, my battery's dying, so
Oh, okay.
I'm going to leave.
Okay.
It was
Thank you
very
for
interesting.
joining in the learning this evening. I'm going
Yes.
to go bake some sourdough.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, have you ever lived in the sukkah? Have you ever slept in one?
We have sadly never this year. My gosh, this year we could have. It's been pleasant enough. We could have been in the sukkah every night. We just have not been out of the habit. Most years we have not experienced sleep-worthy weather. It's funny. The Jews of Ashkenaz, having come from such a cold climate, in general, are viewed as it's called an Eastonis, which means we're not very hardy people when it comes to living in the Sukkot during Sukkot. So most Ashkenaz Jews don't do it. Although in Israel, many, many more have begun to because it's such a lovely climate most of the year, or most Sukkot. But Jews from Poland and Russia, go inside. You're going to freeze to death. Don't die. So geography is a big factor in how halakha evolves and changes over time, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. You see, like for Shabbat, like in the equatorial zones, they go, never light a fire on Shabbat. Jews of Poland, unless you're going to die. Then light that fire
unless
on
you're going to
Shabbat.
die.
Don't die. Keep your kids warm. Don't let them freeze to death. Please light a fire on Shabbat if you're going to die. So, geography is a big determination for how halakha evolves. You see also in Poland, they go, I'm so sorry. You can't use last year's etrog. I'm so sorry. You can't cut your one etrog into 10 pieces and pass that around. Like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. But you can feel like they had one etrog, maybe if they're lucky in certain time periods. Yeah, you really feel the poverty of the Jews of Europe when you read certain things like that. They go, wow, they had not much. Access to bizarre citrons is not, typical.
Okay, I'm gone. I'm out of here.
All
Bye.
Right, everyone, have a good night. And
Thank you.
See you all for
Bye, Ellen. Bye, Alan.
Sarah and Shabbat and Simchat Torah.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.